Namaskar to all of you, and thank you, Didi, for the wonderful songs. This is a series on Sri Aurobindo's book, Synthesis of Yoga. And in the previous few talks, we have been exploring the chapters or the section on Gyan Yog, or yoga of integral knowledge. And on our journey of exploration of Gyan Yog, Sri Aurobindo first starts with helping us ask the right questions. What is it that we are seeking in yoga of integral knowledge? Is it the answer to the traditional question, who am I? And in the process of discovery of who am I, looking at that maybe I am not this body, maybe I am not this mind, maybe I am not this manifestation, maybe I am something beyond, supreme or absolute? Or is it the question that is there something tangible in the present moment which is driving the universe? Is there something tangible within us which drives our thoughts, our actions, our feelings? And that something, that Shakti or that divine will, is it in some way in union with that answer to who am I, which is the supreme absolute divine beyond this universe? How can we come in touch with this element which drives our actions? So to answer these questions is the true purpose of Gyan Yog, and some of the answers are that something is the tapas shakti or the deep dynamic divine will which is seated in the innermost depths of our being. And it is the driver of our actions, our thoughts, our emotions, our intellectual seekings, our cravings, everything in a way. It is the leader of our whole being. And to discover that is the true purpose of Gyan Yog, because this tapas shakti is something which guides our actions in the here and now also, and it is also in the communion with the supreme divine beyond this universe. So it is that ultimate bridge for us to be in the here and now and act, and yet be in the communion with the divine. So at the outset of this section, Sri Aurobindo sets before us the true object of knowledge on the path of Gyan Yoga. And then he talks about the stages through which a sadhak goes through in discovery of this tapas shakti. The first stage being that of right thinking, right thoughts. But right thoughts have to be immediately followed by a true experience. Otherwise, they are dry. So the right thought has to be followed by a stage of a true experience, and that has to be followed by the true experience, has to be followed by the true vision of the Jyotirmaya Brahman. So right thought, experience and vision are the three stages through which one can go through in the process of Gyan Yoga, in the discovery of the tapas shakti, and come face to face with it. And then Sri Aurobindo goes about describing the foundational elements in the process of Gyan Yoga. The first, the purification of the being; second, concentration; and third, renunciation. Purification and concentration are foundational on the path of yoga of integral knowledge. However, the meaning of these two words is redefined by Sri Aurobindo in these chapters. Normally, we perceive purification as a process of cleansing of the system in some way, putting water on top of us, cleansing and purifying our karma is what we mean out of the word purification. But here Sri Aurobindo refers to purification as a process of peeling like an onion peel and arriving at the natural tendencies, the true natural tendencies of each faculty of the human system. For example, the vital part of us, the prana part of us, it is natural for it to enjoy. Joy comes very naturally to it. But is it a joy of seeking after things or trying to possess them in future or in past? Or is it enjoying what is in front of us in the present moment the way it is? So when it is in impure state, it goes on seeking something in future. I will be happy when I have this. But when it's in its purified state, then one seeks joy in what is there in the present moment, the way it is. Similarly, there is a process of purification of the heart, purification of the intellect, the purification of the senses. And then in the process of concentration, usually what we mean by concentration in spirituality is an exclusive concentration on the divine, on a particular mantra or a particular form of the divine. But here also Sri Aurobindo invites us to look at a much broader meaning to concentration, making it not just exclusive to one form of the divine, but including within it the whole manifestation of the divine also. Seeing the divine in every speck of the universe. So having an all-inclusive concentration is the aspiration or the highest possibility of concentration Sri Aurobindo sheds light on. Sure, in our day-to-day life, when we are in action, we do need that exclusive concentration on things. But the aspiration is to arrive at a deeper space where we can retreat back into, where there is this inclusive concentration on the divine, supreme, absolute, and also upon its manifestation. And in this chapter, which is called as Renunciation, Sri Aurobindo helps redefine the word renunciation for all of us. If we look at our life on earth, it is full of polarities or dharma sankat. Dharma sankat is a word we use in the East, in India, and in the West, the common word used to describe it is the polarities in our life, the duality of experience. And Arjuna in Mahabharat went through a similar dharma sankat or polarity, where in the war he was looking at two possibilities which were polar. One was the killing of his own family members on the other side, and on the other side, in a defeat where his own existence was in question. And in such situations of polarities, very often the glorified option of renunciation comes in. Renouncing both the polarities and looking at renouncing life and moving away from it. But there, Lord Krishna points out to him that how it is a weakness to run away from this polarity and this dharma sankat and choose renunciation at this point of time. Rather, face it and move forward in life. And despite Srimad Bhagavad Gita making it very clear that one doesn't have to run away from the polarities of life, yet in especially the Indian context, renunciation is glorified. We have had the great saints and the rishis who've lived in jungles. So it's always been a glorified option in our country. And so through this chapter, Sri Aurobindo offers us insight into why we are all, especially somebody who's had some taste of the ecstasy of the divine, what draws us towards renunciation. He offers 6 reasons for why we are drawn towards renunciation. And then he offers us 8 reasons why it is not the best option to be influenced by this escape from polarities. And then he goes on to redefine the meaning of renunciation for us. And then he puts into context for us, is there still a need for this rejection of objects of pleasure? Is there still a need for inhibition of pleasure? Is there still a need for self-denial? Which is how we perceive renunciation in our day-to-day life, that I'm going to renounce all objects of pleasure and move away from them. So let's first start with what is so attractive about renunciation for a sadhak who aspires to live a spiritual life. And the first positive reason for it is that whoever has experienced the ecstasy of the divine contact or some degree of divine union, that deep experience of love of the divine, there is very often a strong attraction towards it, that experience of harmony. And then when one sees one's life in the present moment and the way the world is full of conflict and disharmony, then one naturally feels like living in that space of bliss and rather not be in the here and now. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a desire for personal salvation. That this is a world of misery, let me myself be liberated, this be the ultimate outcome that I want, that मैं liberate हो जाऊँ, मेरी मुक्ति हो जाए from this cycle of birth and death, and I can live forever in the embrace of the divine. The third attraction, and this is something where, let's say somebody has been reading the literature of Sri Aurobindo and Mother and understands the concept of integral yoga, or for that matter any life-affirming literature in spirituality, and one understands that one of the possibility is combining the spiritual peace inside and our outer works. So there is a possibility of karma yoga, as Srimad Bhagavad Gita mentions, but still it seems difficult. It seems very difficult. And our mind tends to exaggerate this difficulty to almost an impossibility. And then again one seeks renunciation as an easy solution to that. The fourth reason is that a part of us finds a subtle joy and peace in renouncing the objects of pleasure. There is a part of us which feels very nice that I am no more snared by these objects of pleasure and I have moved beyond them. मुझे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता है इनसे अब. So there is a part of our ego which takes pleasure in this. And then there are some lower reasons for us to move towards renunciation. And one of them is weakness. Very often we feel like a victim of life. Oh, I am trying to live a spiritual life and look at people, how they are living. I almost feel like a victim in this life. Or there is a feeling of disgust that the intellect feels that, look, I am living this sattvic life and what are these people doing? I would renounce this world. Or there is a sense of selfishness which starts to come in the lowermost being. That I don't care what these people do. I will do things now my way and I'll renounce this world and move to a separate place. So these are the lowermost possibilities. So there are some very, in a way, positive reasons for us to be drawn towards renunciation. And then there are lowermost possibilities which drive us towards this. And it is good to be aware of them because they are active in all of us to varying degrees. And if somebody is looking to live life consciously, if somebody aspires for fulfilling one's purpose on earth, if somebody is looking to follow the path of integral yoga, then all these reasons in a way are invalid. And they all need to be transformed in some way. If it is weakness and selfishness which drives us towards renunciation, there is also a possibility of divine strength and a divine compassion towards oneself and towards every being in this universe. As a doctor, very often, we come across patients who are trapped in the same loop over and over again. They come back with the same issue over and over again. And at that moment, the doctor has a possibility of acting out of weakness and selfishness that, well, this person is going to go away in his own way. I can't do much. I'll do just my bit and let it be. Or there is a possibility of acting out of strength and compassion every time and help that person move forward one little inch. And that is true for all of us in our own lives. We have somebody or the other who seems like a nemesis to us. And even though this nemesis, seemingly perceived as nemesis, it's a whole different story. It's actually a mirror for us in our own inner universe as well. But still, we, in those situations, if we aspire for spiritual living, have a possibility of weakness and selfishness, that we let them be in their own misery, or we act out of strength and compassion. So this lowermost reason in us of weakness and selfishness needs to be transformed into divine courage and divine compassion. And then that weakness in us, which is normally terrorized by this cycles that we go through, cycles of emotions, the highs and the lows, the cycles of joy and sorrow, the cycles of time, day and night, the cycle of months, the cycle of years, the cycles of yugas, the cycles of birth and death. So a part of us needs to develop that capacity to be able to witness these cycles from above and see the true purpose of these cycles. They are meant for a purpose. They are meant actually for the evolution of the individual, the humanity, and the whole universe. So that capacity, if one develops, then the lowermost reasons for us to seek renunciation no more remain valid. And then if we are drawn towards that ecstasy of the divine embrace, if we want to be close to the divine, then there also there is another possibility, and Sri Aurobindo writes that the ecstasy of the divine embrace will not abandon him because he obeys the impulse of divine love for God in humanity. Or if it seems to draw back, if the ecstasy of the divine embrace seems to draw back from him for a while, he knows by experience that it is to try and test him still further, so that some imperfection in his own way of meeting may fall away from him. So this can be reflected upon by the example of Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa, in her life, she became a nun at, I think, 18, 19 years of age. And she lived in church for a long time, and she developed a very close relationship with Jesus Christ. She used to be in conversations for hours and days with Jesus Christ, until Jesus Christ asked her to move out of the church and go into the slums of India and serve the nothingness. The divine said to her that it is in nothingness is where I am most manifest in human beings. So she moved into the slums, and she writes again and again in her diaries that how at that moment she felt that she has moved away from Jesus Christ. She had that fear in her that I am no more as connected. I don't feel that ecstasy as much of the divine embrace as I used to feel in the church. So she was herself ridden with this fear and this self-doubt. But Jesus Christ was always there with her to reassure that I'm always there with you. So Sri Aurobindo here emphasizes the same point, that one has to have that faith that if in this world of polarity and action, if Arjuna is going out into the war, still Krishna is right by his side. One may not feel the presence of the divine at that moment, but the divine is always present. If we are serving the divine purpose, if we are obeying the impulse of divine love for God in humanity. So that's another way for us to look at this reason for renunciation, where we want to move out of this world and live constantly in that ecstasy of the divine presence. We can bring faith and trust in ourselves that divine is always with us through all these moments, because we are obeying the command of the divine, the will of the divine, and the purpose of the divine. And then if we are seeking that subtle joy and peace that comes from renouncing things, कि मुझे फर्क नहीं पड़ता, I am no more affected by these things, then one needs to remind oneself that the true joy and peace is actually a joy and peace which is unshakable, whether it is in silence or is it in a war. Whereas this joy and peace of indifference and aloofness is not that strong. So if the aspiration for a sadhak is for the true joy and peace, then it cannot happen through aloofness and indifference alone. One has to go through those polarities. One has to go through those rise and falls to deepen one's sense of joy and peace, and then only there can be a possibility of an unshakable peace. And lastly, if one is driven by personal salvation, then one needs to remind oneself that here on the path of integral yoga or living life consciously, the only reason one would seek personal salvation is that if one himself or herself is not liberated, how can they help others? So personal salvation doesn't remain the ultimate goal for a sadhak, but yes, it holds importance and value because it is only through its first one's own individual liberation can one help others. So it is not a rejection of personal salvation, but it just becomes one of the milestones on the spiritual path. And then in the end, on renunciation, Sri Aurobindo points out that especially in context of our country, we always have glorified the example of rishis and saints and sannyasins who have renounced life and lived a life of ascetic and have been guides for a lot of people. So they have always been idealized. But Sri Aurobindo draws our attention towards another group of ideals in front of us, which is the avatars, Sri Ram, Sri Krishna, who have accepted life and embraced life the way it is and contributed to the upliftment of life. So when we are ready to do all these things, when we are ready to embrace strength, compassion, we are ready to go through the cycles of heaven and earth and birth and death, and we can look at their purpose from above. When we carry this trust and faith in us that divine embrace is always with us, when we are truly seeking the unshakable joy and peace, and when we are seeing personal salvation only as a milestone, and when it is the ideal of some of the avatars who embraced life is what is in front of us, then there is a possibility that renunciation can take a new, different meaning for us. And the paradigm shifts towards accepting this world or this manifestation as a half-wheeled manifestation of the divine, which is going through these cycles for the purpose of evolution and progression. And we embrace it fully. And to this, Sri Aurobindo writes that, therefore, renunciation must be for us merely an instrument, not an object. So it is only an instrument, not the ultimate object that I'll renounce life and leave. Nor can it be only or the chief instrument, since our object is the fulfillment of divine in human being. So our object here is fulfillment of the divine in human being, Nar Narayan. Then it is not an object, it is only an instrument, and even in that instrument, it is not the chief instrument. It is one of the instruments. A positive aim which cannot, our object which is fulfillment of divine in the human being, which is a positive aim, cannot be reached by negative means. So renunciation cannot take us to divine fulfillment. The negative means can only be for the removal of that which stands in the way of the positive fulfillment. So the only purpose that renunciation serves for us is to remove that which comes in the way of our positive fulfillment, or that which comes in the way of our entire self giving to the divine. And the three most important things which come in the way of our entire self giving and a positive fulfillment are: number one, the attachments to cravings or desires in the senses and the heart. So, number one is attachments. Number two is this self will or self thought which is seated in our mind. And number three is the presence of ego at the center of our consciousness. So actually, Sri Aurobindo here draws our attention in redefining renunciation. It's not about renouncing things outside. The actual renunciation needs to happen inwardly. If we look at them one by one, the renunciation of attachments to cravings and desires, it is not the outward rejection of the object which is so important, but it is our own attachment to all the previous experiences related to that object that needs to be renounced. If we look at it with an example of, let's say, something we are very fond of eating, let's say a sweet. Let's take an example of a gulab jamun. So one can say gulab jamun is bad, I'm not going to eat it. It's not good for me. This is an outer rejection of the object of pleasure. Whereas if we are ready to look inside, that there is a previous conditioning or a previous attachment to the experiences of enjoying that gulab jamun, and that creates a certain craving in our senses and in our heart the moment we are again exposed to it. That is what needs to be witnessed fully and needs to be renounced. And here, even as a doctor, there's no point telling people don't smoke, don't eat sweets, don't eat this, don't eat that, it's not good for you. They already know it. As a doctor also, we are more effective when we are able to look at the reasons why this person is craving this. Sometimes they have parasites in their system. They have such bacteria growing in the system which are creating cravings. Sometimes there are nutritional deficiencies which are creating those cravings. Sometimes there are emotional suppressions which are driving it. Sometimes the person is lacking sweetness in life. So when we rather work on those causes, we are ready to look at that inner space of cravings and desires and those attachments, then we become more effective even in our day-to-day practical life. And same holds for spirituality. It's not about renouncing the world, but what keeps us attached. What are the cravings and desires we are holding on to from the past experiences? And in the same way, just like we have certain attachments to cravings and desires, we can also have certain aversions to certain things based on past experiences, some things which we don't like. And then we can also have certain things which trigger insecurities in us. So this is the rag and the dvesh and the abhinivesh, the insecurities based experiences which need to be renounced. And we need to engage with the gulab jamun in the present moment without those past rag, dvesh and abhinivesh. Oh, if I'm going to eat this, then I'm going to get sick and I'm going to get fat. So even that same gulab jamun is triggering some rag, but it is also triggering some abhinivesh. And it is also triggering some dvesh. So all of these are forms of attachments which need to be renounced when we engage with this world. And Sri Aurobindo describes many of these polarities that are present in our life, and he writes that therefore attachment and desire we must utterly cast out. There is nothing in the world to which we must be attached, nor wealth, nor poverty, nor joy, nor suffering, nor life, nor death, nor greatness, nor littleness, not vice, nor virtue, nor heaven, nor earth. But the next question is, in this message, is it again turning into a sense of indifference that I don't care about this or that? Or Sri Aurobindo here is looking at a possibility of relating to things in a different way. Because attachment is egoism in love. I love the gulab jamun. Whereas there is a possibility, there is love for gulab jamun. So here, immediately when we go deeper, when there is a deepening of our love, there is a possibility of expansion of love. There is a possibility of love becoming universal. And when the love is much more immensely vast and infinite, then both the polarities seem equal to us. We can love both the polarities equally. And from this deeper space of universal love, there is a natural cleansing or purification of these attachments. There is a natural renunciation of these attachments. So Sri Aurobindo invites us first to look at how in our subconscious space these raga, dvesh and abhinivesh are constantly active, and then look at the possibility of universal love, which helps us embrace the same object of pleasure without engaging in this polarity. So this is the first thing to be renounced on the path of yoga. The second thing is, if we are renouncing these objects or these attachments, then for whom are we renouncing? Are we renouncing it for that deeper divine space in us, for that Shakti? Or are we renouncing it for another intermediary form of ego, which is the self-will and the self-thought? And this self-centeredness in the mind is the second thing we need to look at. Sri Aurobindo describes this self-centered space as a spider in its web. And this spider of I and my, it keeps making this web of thinking and actions which are self-centered. And it keeps growing its own web, and it hates to be put into another web. This is my viewpoint, this is my thought, this is my way of looking at things, this is my paradigm, this is my discovery, this is my way of seeing the divine. This is the true way of seeing the divine. Mera Bhagwan hi sahi hai. So this spider creates its own web, and it hates to be transplanted into fresh viewpoints. It struggles with the spiders and webs of other individuals. And it is in a constant struggle also with the universe, trying to overpower the universe or arrive at some form of perceivable harmony with this universe. But eventually, this spider and web are in a struggle. This spider and this web is also a creation of the Prakriti, and it also serves a certain purpose because it provides us with a relatively stable base to go through the experience of life. It offers us a stable base to act in life, and that is the purpose of this spider and web. But this spider fears that if it moves out of its own web, then it will not have any anchor. It will not have any base from where it can act. But that's not true. There is a possibility of a deeper space which is not only inclusive of all these spiders and webs, all these smaller eyes, but also much more. It is a deeper space which is accepting and loving of all these webs, yet it has a certain intelligence to know and do whatever is the best in the present moment. So this is something we need to explore and see, is there a space of a greater I or a greater self within us? Just like there is a possibility of moving from human love of attachments to a divine universal love, there is also a possibility of moving from a peripheral governance from the spider to moving to a central governance. Sure enough, a little bit of peripheral governance is required for practical purpose for all of us, but it can be only to the degree it is necessary. We don't have to overindulge in it. It's almost like the spider is addicted to thinking. So we are almost addicted to thinking, and we keep on making more and more of it. But the fact is that we can operate out of that deeper space and use this peripheral spider and web only to the degree it is absolutely necessary. Think only as much is absolutely necessary, with the spirit of sacrifice, with the spirit of surrender, only to retreat back into that space of greater I. So this is the second thing Sri Aurobindo invites us to do, is to renounce the self-will and self-thought. And this renunciation is also a process of, it involves the first two steps or foundational elements of Gyan Yog, which is purification and concentration. So this web itself needs to be purified of attachments, again, that these are my thoughts, or these are my viewpoints, or these are my paradigm, to these are thoughts. This is one of the infinite ways of looking at things. This is one of the infinite branches of the truth. And be vigilant of the mind and intellect with its reductionistic tendencies, creating a wall around our definitions of God also. Because that is what it does. It even builds up, even what we are hearing right now, and if we take it too seriously, then it builds up another new wall for us. And so Sri Aurobindo writes here that nor must we attach ourselves even to the truths we hold most securely, for they are but forms and expressions of the ineffable, who refuses to limit himself to any form or expression. So these truths which we hold so securely, yes, they are forms and expressions of ineffable, But that ineffable refuses to limit himself by any expression. Always we must keep ourselves open to the higher word from above that does not confine itself to its own sense and light of thought. So the vigilance has to be there to always stay open to the higher word and not wall into any aspect of truth. So this purification the web has to go through, and then it has to concentrate on the possibility of that greater I, and then renounce the attachments to it and operate out of this greater I as much as possible. So this is the second step in renunciation. But there is another third subtle level of egoism we need to renounce, which is at the center of our consciousness. Whatever we are referring this deeper space to can very often get covered with this subtle egoism of doership, or egoism of being an instrument of the divine. And very often this subtle egoism takes up the garb of service or seva, or the garb of altruism or of indifference. These are the most effective disguises of this subtle egoism. For Arjuna, who was facing these two polarities or dharma sankat, how beautiful it might have appeared, how altruistic it might have appeared, that by forsaking his own desire for the kingdom and renouncing that desire, he has saved millions of lives and enormous bloodshed. To many, it might have seemed quite a beautiful thing to do, and he would have gone on his journey for discovering the truth. But here, Sri Krishna was not to be fooled. That is, the Sri Krishna is that deeper space, is not to be fooled by this subtle egoism. Because here also Arjuna, from the center of Arjuna is control. He's trying to control the outcome of the situation. So this subtle control can continue to exist at the center of our consciousness, and that is what needs to be renounced. If that inner voice or that inner Krishna demands of us something which to the external world may seem like a very egoistic or a self-pleasuring thing to do, it needs to be done. Whatever is our swadharma in the present context, which will enliven us, the context and the universe, needs to happen, irrespective of how others will see it. Because it is the I within which matters, not the I outside. So one needs to be aware or vigilant of this subtle egoism also coming in. And Sri Aurobindo describes this as the influence of the environment works often with great subtlety. We prefer and put on almost unconsciously the garb which will look best in the eye that regards us from outside. And we allow a veil to drop over the eye within. So in order to appear nice and beautiful to the environment, we put on a certain garb and we allow a veil to appear on our inner voice. We are impelled to drape ourselves in the vow of poverty, or in the garb of service, or in outward proofs of indifference and renunciation and a spotless sainthood, because that is what tradition and opinion demand of us, so we can make the best impression on our environment. But all this is vanity and delusion. If I am X and I feel that I am still the doer of this action, then naturally the person is impacted by how the world is perceiving X doing this action. And then it seems very natural for X to choose that sort of action which will appear nice to the world. But here comes our vigilance that we are not the doers, and the remedy that Sri Aurobindo offers to this is always to act in God. Be in God, act in God. Be in that one self and act in that one self. Be in that one self which is equally present within this body and every body and within every speck of this universe. So the renunciation here is to refuse to act out of the individual center of consciousness and always act in God, be in God. And that is the true divine's deeper space, which is equally embodied in everyone, everywhere. So if we see here, the word renunciation has taken a much deeper and a much vaster meaning for all of us. And in this space of renunciation, the outer action may continue to be the same. The woodcutter is still cutting the wood and chopping the wood. The king who was earlier ruling the kingdom still rules the kingdom, but now he has just given away the proprietorship and the land rights to the saint, and he does the same thing but with the sense of doing it as a job for that saint or that job for that deeper space. So this may not mean that our outer actions change. Our outer action may continue to be the same or they may differ, but it is the inner space, it's the inward renunciation which has happened through this. And then the question arises that what space should the outer rejection of objects take? Is it still relevant or it's completely irrelevant? So here Sri Aurobindo points out that these things still hold a purpose. If we are still lost in the mud honey of, if somebody is so engaged with the world that is not even looking at a possibility of spiritual living, for a temporary period, we do need to go through a phase of outer rejection of objects of pleasure or inhibition of pleasure or self-denial. It still has and holds a certain value. But what we need to be careful of is to engage in this outer rejection with as much as possible non-violence. Ahimsa. Because if we are in the search of truth, Satyam and Ahimsa are a yin and yang, they are a couple. They go hand in hand. If we engage in violence, we sometimes move further away from the truth. So the rejection of the outer objects has to be only as much as necessary, and it has to be with minimum possible violence. A beautiful example of this is somebody asked Sant Mahavir that, what do you think about alcohol? Should one consume alcohol or not consume alcohol? And his reply was मदिरा जैसे मादक पदार्थ का सेवन केवल दवा रूपी मात्रा में करना चाहिए. If we look at this, he avoided hinsa. He did not say alcohol is bad, don't drink it at all. Yet he conveyed the message that it is not the best for you and it has to be consumed in very small amounts. And he also acknowledged the positive purpose of alcohol because it can be a part of a lot of medicines. So actually, renunciation is an art. It is required also, but yet it is only to be done as much required. So it is actually an art of renunciation, which we all need to learn how to say no to things. So to summarize, we looked at how the reasons for renunciation in ourselves need to be transformed towards strength, compassion, and a position of witness which can understand the purpose of cycles in life. We need to aspire for unshakable joy and peace. We seek personal salvation only for the purpose of eventual contribution to liberation of all. We seek to trust and have faith that divine ecstasy is always with us if we are following our Swadharma. And with that, we look at the possibility of a wider meaning to renunciation, remembering that it is only one of the instruments only meant to get certain things out of the way. It is not the ultimate aim. And eventually see that renunciation and joy of life, they need to be put in balance. Both are equally important. Renunciation brings a certain liberation, and joy or bhakti brings a certain divine delight. To both renunciation and enjoying life, there are the lowermost possibilities and the highermost possibilities, and they both need each other. Lowermost possibilities of joy is greed and lust and an attempt at possessing everything. The highest possibility of joy is seeking after the divine delight in things. A beautiful possibility in the middle is of a psychic engagement with things. With renunciation, the lowermost possibility is of an outright rejection of everything. And the highest possibility is what we discussed through this chapter. So it is something we need to consciously reflect on, that what do we choose? What kind of, they both need each other. Do we choose the higher possibilities of renunciation and enjoying life, or we choose the lowermost possibilities? And with this, in the end, I leave you with some lines from Aurobindo in this chapter, and he says, "We shall have no attachment to our life in the world. If that attachment exists, we must renounce it and renounce utterly. But neither shall we have any attachment to the escape from the world, to salvation, to the great self-annihilation. If that attachment exists, that also we must renounce and renounce it utterly." Thank you. Dr. Bijlani, if you'd like to add something. Okay. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kasyat bhag bhavet. Om shanti shanti shanti.